Alright, so we've got some updates today in regards to the Metal Gear franchise from Delta Snake Eater all the way to that Konami Master Collection that was announced earlier this week. And we've also got some updates on how Square Enix is going to redefine New Game Plus modes with their Final Fantasy XVI difficulties, and also how Capcom has had a hand in influencing Final Fantasy XVI's combat. If any of that sounds interesting to you, feel free to click the like button, and if you'd like to stick around, you can subscribe as well. It is always appreciated. So starting off with that Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater news. Obviously, the game was revealed earlier this week at the PlayStation Showcase, and we've actually got some updates in regards to the game's voiceovers. This comes to us from the Metal Gear official Twitter account, where they are saying that the original story and character voices from Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater will remain the same for Delta Snake Eater. Now, if my dumbass is interpreting that correctly, it sounds like they're going to take the original game's voiceovers, clean them up a little bit, and repurpose them for Delta Snake Eater, which is really cool. We're going to get the OG voices back in this game, which means that David Hayter is returning as Naked Snake / Big Boss. Now, what's going to be really interesting here is to see how the old school VO meshes with the updated graphics and gameplay systems of a next-gen game. Konami has stated that they want to remain as faithful as possible to the original Snake Eater, especially in regards to the gameplay and now the voiceover, so it's going to be really cool to see how those two mesh together, and we're probably going to have to wait until we get a proper story and gameplay trailer to really see how they blend old with new. And I also hope that these actors are being properly compensated for having their old work repurposed for this new project. Now, moving over to that Metal Gear Master Collection from Konami, initially we thought we were just getting 3 games, Metal Gear 1, Metal Gear 2, as well as Snake Eater. But based on this PlayStation Store breakdown, it looks like they're going to be including a lot more than we anticipated. So we've got Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, which were those old school MSX games, the top-down sprite-based Metal Gear games. Those will be included in this collection. And alongside the original Metal Gear, we're going to be getting the VR mission / special missions. So for those of you out there who were too young to remember, back in the day we didn't have DLC. If developers wanted to update their game, they would have to re-release the game or just release the standalone new stuff on its own. And that's what happened with Metal Gear. There was the Metal Gear VR Missions game that consisted only of VR stuff, which was really cool, all that cool training stuff. So it's nice to know that they're bringing that back for this collection. Now, Metal Gear 2 and Metal Gear 3 seem to be their HD collection versions, so Substance and Subsistence. Now, I missed out on these collections when they first came around, so I'm unsure of what features from the base games made it into the HD collections and what didn't. But it'd be really cool to see if the online play from Subsistence is still intact. I have many fond memories of playing that game at night online doing the deathmatch modes, and you'd be surprised how many people actually fall for the box hiding trick. I would hide in a box in plain sight, they'd run past me, I'd pop out and wallop their ass. If they could bring that back, that would be really cool, but it's nice to know that they're using the Substance and Subsistence version of those games. And with this being Volume 1, there is hope that there could be a Volume 2 in the near future, perhaps including the PSP Metal Gear games like Peace Walker and Metal Gear Acid, which if I remember correctly was the card-based game, which, yeah, there was a really weird period of time where a lot of developers wanted to turn their franchise into a card-based battle system, which I'm kind of glad we're over that. It was a weird phase. And then obviously you have Metal Gear Solid 4, which is seemingly stuck on the PlayStation 3, probably because it was so tied to that PlayStation 3 hardware and that cell processor architecture. So that might be a game that would require a full-on remake and not a remaster. But crossing my fingers that somewhere in the future there is a Volume 2 coming for this Metal Gear Master Collection. Now, moving on to Final Fantasy XVI's difficulty modes, we did cover previously that there would be a New Game Plus mode called Final Fantasy mode, and we've got some more fine details on that thanks to the Game Informer coverage that's been happening these past couple of weeks. And they spoke to Ryota Suzuki, who is the game's combat director, and he opened up a little bit more in regards to that Final Fantasy mode, as well as a secondary mode called Ultimaniac mode, which we will get to in a second. Essentially, what Final Fantasy mode is a New Game Plus mode where you have all of your upgraded equipment and the game is going to be much more difficult. So the enemies are going to be in larger quantities. Some enemies will have remixed locations, so you might have have an endgame enemy show up in the middle of the game. It's kind of exciting to think about. But Suzuki goes on to clarify why they did this. He says, the main design philosophy is that the first playthrough is about learning Clive, learning the controls, and then enjoying the story. The second playthrough, we want to shift that focus because the story hasn't changed to the action. For example, in story mode, while players may encounter waves of enemies, a lot of times enemies don't attack at once to allow players to be able to handle everything. In the harder modes of the game, we have removed these limitations so that you have multiple enemies all attacking Clive at the same time. Basically, what we've done with Final Fantasy mode is give players controlling Clive the sense that they're always in danger, that death is around the corner, and that you'll need to really pay attention to be able to clear the content. Now that description sounds really awesome, but it's also kind of bittersweet because it kind of makes me think that the standard base difficulty of the game might be a little too easy, and based on some previews that have come out recently from people like Maximilian Dude, it does sound like the game is going to be on the easier side, so it's not going to be a Devil May Cry type game in terms of its difficulty. But again, this is a game that they want to reach casual audiences, and you really need to kind of slowly draw people in instead of just beating them over the head right away. People have to build up their skills in these games, but knowing that you have to wait for the harder difficulty for the enemies to become more dynamic is a little bittersweet, because I really think about games like God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok, which are both games that had huge influences on the 16's development, and I think of how fast-paced and frenetic and how chaotic those battles are. It's not just a one-on-one situation a lot of times. A lot of times it's groups of enemies that are attacking you at once. You're fighting one guy in front of you, the guy behind you is about to hit you with a projectile, and the guy to your left is also getting ready to attack you. So you have to fight the guy in front of you, dodge the projectile from the guy behind you, and then parry the guy from your left. So it sounds super crazy and chaotic, but it really adds to the fun and depth of a lot of these combat systems. But it could also be a situation where you need all of that upgraded gear to really make it through the Final Fantasy mode. Now, in regards to that Ultimaniac mode, they don't really clarify whether or not that's playable in the story or if it's reserved solely for the arcade mode for Final Fantasy 16. Based on what I've read, it sounds like Ultimaniac, which is going to be even more difficult, will be reserved for the arcade mode, where you can do replay missions and you can do waves of enemies that get increasingly harder, adding bosses into the mix. So it kind of sounds like those are going to be two separate things. Now, in regards to the Capcom influence on this game's combats, Ryota Suzuki really talks a lot about working on Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and using the assist feature in that game to kind of design Torgal and his abilities. So Clive is the only character in the game that we will control. However, we can issue commands to Torgal. He can heal us, he can attack, he can set up combos, and he can even do combo finishers. And that assist mechanic from Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is really what inspired that. So it's really cool to see something from a fighting game make its way into 16's combat. And Suzuki doesn't stop there. He talks more about special actions. So for example, in a fighting game, you may have a character where the combo is light punch, medium punch, and then you wait a beat, and then you hit medium punch 2 more times. And by doing that, you're unlocking an entirely new string of combos that you can utilize in battle. So you can even do this in Devil May Cry, where you can attack once, you can attack twice with Dante. You pause, you wait a second, Dante will sometimes shift stances, and when you start attacking again, you're now doing a completely new group of attacks. I think they're called Rekkas, if I remember correctly, in the fighting game community. So knowing that Clive can do that as well, and seeing all of these fighting game mechanics make their way into 16's combat is so cool. Suzuki has a great pedigree working at Capcom, where he's just surrounded by some really great diverse games, from the action stuff on Devil May Cry to even maybe the horror stuff in Resident Evil to the fighting game stuff with Street Fighter and Marvel vs. Capcom. And to take those influences that are constantly surrounding you and try to work them into a game that's action-based is really awesome. And being a huge Capcom fan, that makes me really excited to really get into the meat and bones of this game's gameplay and to see what other influences kind of crept their way in. It's going to be really cool to see some of the combo videos that come out from the community for Final Fantasy 16. So with that being said, that's the video. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you guys think of this Metal Gear news, that Metal Gear collection, as well as them reusing the old VO from Snake Eater? And what do you think about how Capcom has influenced Final Fantasy 16's combat? And what do you think about those New Game Plus difficulty modes? Leave those in the comments down below. I am Curious Corduroy. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.